Y'all, welcome back to Kentucky Fried Wargaming, where two guys who aren't qualified to talk about anything decide to talk about a game with hard math and chance. I'm Joe.
And I'm John!
Are we going spooky for the topic?
It is spooky topic time.
We're way ahead of schedule for like spooky month, but it's true. We picked a spooky faction. Today we are continuing on with our faction identities, our faction focuses, if you will. And where we, in Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings, take each of the factions and break them down one at a time to talk about the core tenets of what makes that faction who they are. Not in like a mechanical tournament competitive play mindset. We're not the guys for that. But rather sort of more generalistic ways. How they play to the average person who picks them up or who plays across from them on the table. What rules sort of define them, what heroes we think are emblematic of their playstyle. And then at the end of the episode, we rate them all on a couple of scales that are leaned more towards the casual than the normal tournament stuff. We've done a couple of these. Old Dominion, though, is one that is kind of unique in that a lot of their rules are exceptions to core rules, which makes them a little hard to understand if you're a brand new player to the game.
And you might ask yourself, neither of you play Old Dominion. How do you know anything about it? And let me tell you, this is the army that both of us have played against the most. In our playgroup, we have multiple people who play Old Dominion, and we have played them many times.
Yeah, there are 4 Old Dominion players in our play group.
So
our editor, Seth, Old Dominion player.
So we have played against Old Dominion plenty. So we know very much about this faction, and we have talked to all of them for many months to get all of their thoughts on things. So we are coming from this at least somewhat informed, even if us ourselves don't play this faction. We have played against it enough to have a vibe.
Also, I think what helps is that it's not a very hard faction to wrap your head around. None of it is really, really complicated. There are some things working under the hood that together make a force that can do some pretty strong stuff, but it's not complicated stuff. Which even as an outsider who just plays against it a lot, you could kind of understand what's happening here. And when we think about what makes the faction sort of work as it does, what makes it feel like undead Roman legions, the answer, of course, is the faction rules, primarily, when we look at these various Conquest sub-factions. And for the Old Dominion, they've got a couple of rules, but all of them are really pulling some weight to give you the flavor. The first, the sort of foundation we are building everything on top of, is Animate Vessel. Animate Vessel says that units with this rule get Terrifying 1, and they have no resolve score. That means they auto-pass any resolve checks you have them take. And they cannot take the Inspire action, but can be inspired through other means. Meaning, you can't be inspired except if you charge. Or you can't be inspired unless you have a rule that says always inspired. There are rules that say you can get that. And secondly, Terrifying 1 is pretty good. It means that any of your units with Animate Vessel are giving a leadership debuff to your opponents, which is a pretty strong rule to have up all the time, especially when you put out a lot of wounds over the course of a game, like Old Dominion can. And on top of yourself, not having to take any resolve checks, which is foundational.
I think that's the thing everybody associates with Old Dominion the most currently, is that they basically, in a roundabout way, cut all the damage that someone would take to about a third, maybe close to a half. They ignore a phase of damage on most of their units, right?
Yeah,
so
very quickly, if you're a new player and you don't understand how damage works, let's say I hit John for 3 attacks. John takes all 3 attacks. That would be 3 damage. Normally, then John would roll 3 resolve checks, because I dealt him damage in melee. He would take none in this case. Potentially so much as having his damage if he failed all his resolves, or, cutting it down by a half or a third.
Yeah, so that takes like a unit, their base unit of legionnaires, which have 4 wounds a stand. It takes them from like okay, 4 wounds a stand isn't that much. That's what men-at-arms have. That's what that's like the baseline for this game. And then you quickly realize that's a much tougher unit now that those wounds just go further.
Yes, you are not going to lose any wounds to resolve, which honestly you lose quite often. So everything in this faction is going to get tankier and also hit a little harder because they make the enemy fail resolves more often. So like keep that in mind as we continue on. This is really, really at the foundation of all of this. Next, Memories of Old. This is an ability that is unique to each individual regiment, but every regiment you will find in the army will have an entry on it for Memory of Old, meaning that at a certain point or in certain ways, you can proc that big benefit on that unit, and it will give each of them a buff that helps them do the thing they want to be doing anyway.
Yeah, and some of these are stackable, and that matters for later when you find out why. But like narratively, this is actually kind of cool. This is them remembering parts of their former life before they were undead, which is super fun, like super flavorful. And they show that in cool ways with some units, which is very good. And then past memories of old, because we will come back to that as we start talking about other things, is something called empowerment, which is where we're going to take a brief aside away from this to explain that whenever you lose a stand, you generate something called a power token, right? So if anything with animate vessel is destroyed, that stand generates a token. There are other ways to generate tokens within the army, from relics, masteries. There's another rule later on you're going to hear about that allows you to generate them. And they go into one of 2 pools, either the Dark Power pool or the Dark Pantheon pool. We are not going to talk about the Dark Pantheon pool in this video. We are also not going to talk about the Fallen Divinity at all. As a brief aside, that list that runs the Fallen Divinity and runs that specific pool is very, very unique and is very different from the rest of the army. It is sort of an advanced playstyle beyond just like the normal basics of the army. And so we didn't want this... That deserves like his own video in the future and not just a tack onto here. Right?
Yeah. It's its own monster entirely. And it plays orthogonally to the way a lot of this plays. And if you're running a Fallen Divinity list, it's very different than the standard Old Dominion lists.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about what that Dark Power pool looks like. And they have tiers. There's tiers 1, 2, 3, and then if you have certain supremacy abilities, that can also go up to 4. Now, from 0 tokens in your pool to 8 tokens, you're tier 1. From 9 to 17, you're at tier 2. From 18 to 22, you're at tier 3. From 23 up, you're in tier 4. Now, that sounds like, wow, I gotta lose 8 stands before I'm in the thing? No. Remember, there are other ways to get these tokens, these power tokens, to generate these points. You can generate them on Legionnaires. Like if they have an upgrade they can take to when they're on their objectives, they can generate them. And there's another rule later here that gets them. So like you do get them more than you would think. There's even a spell that someone can cast that allows you to get it. So you're going to get them. But what do these tiers do? Like why do you care about this? Like why are you trying to generate this dark power from like your undead spooky dudes? Well, here's why. The Dark Power pool has a tier 2 ability. Starting off, tier 1 has nothing. There's no power up for tier 1. Once you get to tier 2, you will get the ability to do Memories of Old as a draw event or an action. By default, Memories of Old is an action. This will allow you to do it as either, which is good. Specifically, the draw event here is really nice, because then you can just like draw it, activate it, go on.
And then still get your 2 actions. You're not paying a sort of action tax to get your stuff rolling.
But it gets better. Because then at tier 3, you can do it as a draw event and an action. So they could stack. For instance, Praetorians can get +1 Bastion. Like Bastion +1. If you do it twice, they get Bastion +2. Which is +2 defense. Which is pretty good.
On top of their shield. Which, pretty good.
Pretty good.
Can attest. Quite tough.
Can confirm. Quite good. Bring a line breaker, please. So that's very good, right? Very powerful ability. You really want to try to get to tier 3 because that's really where like the meat of your Old Dominion units are going to be at. Is at tier 3 where you're going to have like the most abilities. But it gets there's more to it.
One more thing at tier 3. You also count as always inspired. I have to pay this off. Remember how we said like you can't be expired except when you can, and except when you can, and except when you can't. This is one of the except when you can. That at tier 3, your whole army is always inspired, which is quite good.
So now you can't take the inspire action, which is really what ultimately Old Dominion just don't get the inspired action. They still get it when they charge. They can still give them other things. So like, here you go. You just don't even have to pay an action. You just have it. And then tier 4. Should you have the supremacy? Should you get 23 more power points? You're going to get all of those things we just said. In addition, you're going to get enemy regiments engage with a friendly regiment with the animate vessel special rule suffer an additional wound for every failed resolve roll of a 6 when testing morale. That's pretty good.
It makes them run even harder when you nuke their bravery.
That is very, very good, right? So, Dark Power Pool, you want to get this up. It's okay. You're going to bring a bunch of Legionnaires anyways, and they're going to die, and they're just going to make your stuff better. But, wait, there's more. There's another army rule.
It's feeling a little Wadruni in terms of how many words we're reading.
So, the last and final army rule for them is Blasphemous Soma. Before Supremacy, you may add a power token to a pool of your choice. So, for this case, Dark Power Pool, which means over the course of a 10-round game, you will get 10 points in your Dark Power Pool. Guaranteed.
Yep, just from this alone. So it stabilizes the potential that maybe you don't lose as many Legionnaire ranks as you wanted to. You're still going to get Dark Power and get up into some of them higher tiers.
And, in addition to that, you get +1 to all reinforcement rolls. 6s will still fail. So that means that your lights get to come on even easier, your heavies get to come on even easier, your mediums come on even easier, which is nice, because this faction doesn't really have access to flank, and so this really just sort of allows you to get stuff in fairly reliably. More reliably than most factions, if we're being honest. Without having to build towards it, you just get this.
Yeah, your stuff is going to come on with almost, like, I have a Nords list that we talked about in the Nords show that, like, skews towards getting stuff auto on. You almost have that level of efficiency for your lights and your mediums without having to do all the hoops and stuff. It's pretty cool. It's compelling. It gets them on fast for undead, slow, shambling zombies.
And now, we're going to go on to the part of the show where we talk about supremacy abilities. Arguably, like, the thing that sort of flavors your whole list, right? The thing that you pick, and it sort of, like, defines where you're going to go. And the reality with Old Dominion is that most of the supremacy abilities are pretty good. Like, most of them have some form of play. I think there's one sort of, like, winner, air quotes, which we'll talk about. But I think all of them, compared to other factions, just have plenty of choice. It's not like some other factions where you're struggling to find a good one. Here, you were just like, here is one. Like,
yeah, I think there's just like one that is incredible, which overshadows the others that I would say are still good.
The first one we're going to talk about, and it's not the one that overshadows everyone, even though it's kind of going to sound like it at first, is called From the Ziliarch.
He's really, really good. I've had this ability wreck my whole army in a turn. It was really incredible. From the Ziliarch, you get access to tier 4. And also, once per game, his warband clashes twice.
So if you build out his warband with like really good units, you can just have like a huge swing where you just like clash twice. And there's not a lot of things in this game that lets you clash twice. So this is just really good.
I can't think of another that lets you clash twice. Especially not with 4 units.
And if you were a newer Old Dominion player, you probably want to actually play with this one for a little bit. It sort of allows you to be a little bit more forgiving, and it sort of lets you sort of get used to what this army does. Now, the next one, though, is what I think is the best one in the faction. of all of the games I've played against Old Dominion, this is the one that always puts me in the corner the most. I think it's the most the hardest struggle, because the biggest weakness of Old Dominion is that they lack mobility. Right? They lack being able to be reactive to stuff. Once they've deployed, they're kind of deployed there. They're just dealing with it. But this, Glimmers of the Golden Age, allows you to not have to worry about that as much. It gives you access to Tier 4, which is just good, right? But here, that's sort of gravy. You're not even really need it. Because what you want is that you can, once per game, count your tier of Dark Power as one tier higher for a turn. So if you're at Tier 2, you can count as Tier 3 earlier than you probably could. If you're at Tier 3, you can count as Tier 4, right? Really, you're going to want to use that to count from your Tier 2 to your Tier 3 sooner, so that you're getting free draw event Memories of Old sooner. But, again, there's more. It also allows you to, once per game, pick everything and give it a free reform.
Yes. Every one of your units, free reform. Again, an army that really struggles with oftentimes redeploying and mobility tricks, you just get it army-wide, in addition to going up your tier. So the way this normally is played against me is after my opponent, let's say our editor Seth, for example, gets to Tier 2, and he's looking for his Tier 3 power swing. Because that's really when a lot of your damage and your tricks and your abilities come online. Whether that be Bone Golems, whether that be Cataphracti, you want the Tier 3. So when Tier 2 rolls around, he will pop this, and then all of the mediums and some of the heavies or whatnot are starting to come online. And then all of those, now are going to get their Tier 3 early, so he's going to be kicking my butt quite a bit earlier than normal. And then 2, everything's going to get the free reform in the army, so he can sort of shift and reposition and get stuck in as he wants to, allowing the butt kick to go further than normal. And then, through the intervening clapbacks, oftentimes you'll have enough to then actually get into Tier 3, so that the next turn, when it's back time for him to activate, he is, again, on Tier 3, and can keep that sort of combo pressure going. And it starts you off much faster than you otherwise would be.
Mm-hmm. And the reform allows you to get out of a bad situation or play more aggressively if you need to. It really just allows you to do what you want. But we told you the supremacies, but how does this army play? What is
because I think this is the question that matters the most, right? Don't get me wrong, there are some nitty-gritty kind of people out there, but if that's what you're looking for, there are videos out there for that. But if you're considering this army as either maybe your first army or a secondary army that you want to play, the real question you want to know is okay, how does this actually play out? And in this case, it's actually quite easy to say. Some factions in Conquest have a number of different playstyles hidden underneath them, and it's hard to kind of encapsulate it into a quick hitter. Old Dominion's not one of them. They're very easy to sort of predict and describe. You are going to be an army that plays pretty uniquely, and that you're going to struggle to get traction and win fights in the first few turns. Oftentimes, your wins, so to speak, in the first few turns are triple activating your Legionnaires to triple marching your Legionnaires up onto the objectives to start getting some points. And in those early turns, you're going to find your Legionnaires will be more tanky than you expect because of that resolve buff, but they're not going to do a lot of killing or do the business in that time. And really what you're doing is you're buying time for your mediums and your heavies to come on that really are your hammers and do most of the lift. Mm-hmm. And then as your Legionnaires die and your tiers start to tick up, you start to get your points, you start to get your death, all of your army-wide abilities are going to kick on. And then you are going to roll over your opponent most of the time, especially once you get towards Tier 3, Tier 4, especially with your hard-hitting units like the Cataphracts or the Bone Golems, another one that has just really kicked butt. Or Varangian Guard also could kick butt.
Yeah, Varangian Guard have gotten a little toned back in the more recent update, but Bone Golems are currently the spicy choice.
They're very good. They hit like a truck. They're tougher than a coffin nail. And also that aura of death.
And they look cool.
Rough. They
They're
do look
really
cool.
good, but they look cool.
So it's very predictable in that way. You're going to start slow. You're going to get on the objectives. You're going to get your points. You're going to roll over people late game. That is the play style.
Yeah, it's very straightforward. There's not a whole lot of like tricks to it. It's sort of like you build the list and you know what the list is going to do and has a game plan when you build it, and then you just pilot it. Like you create the thing, you then pilot the thing, and regardless of opponent, it doesn't change that often what you're doing. Your plan stays relatively the same.
Yeah, the big question is often just, does your big army-wide buff come online fast enough to win the game?
Mm-hmm.
That is the question. It doesn't change your strategy, so to speak, usually, but that is what hinges on your victories or your defeats. If your opponent is slow off the jump and you manage to meet them on the objective or beat them there, it's going to be a great game for you. But vice versa, maybe you get bogged down, maybe you don't quite get the rolls you need, maybe not going to be the best game for you.
Yeah, this army really succeeds at attrition. Just attrition. It doesn't do very well against extreme pressure, right? Very early on pressure, slapping it, breaking it in half, taking units off the table quickly. It doesn't do. Especially if you start taking some of the characters that can like heal stuff back. Like you want to just like get hurt and then come back, not get wiped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going low is totally viable here. It's a thing, and we will return back to this like strength and weakness, because when we go to rate armies, as we do for all of these, we want to rate them in ways that one, that we look at forces in and kind of how we interpret them through our own perspectives, but also those of the people around us who aren't like die-hard competitive players, who aren't really, really, really tied into the efficiency side of the community or that sort of list building style, but rather who look at it more from a holistic hobby standpoint, sort of like what we think might be important to them as well. So we rate them on flavor to gameplay, how newcomer friendly they are, and also if there's a lot of room in there for long-term mastery. And we look at these from faction to faction and give them a rating of like report card, American report card stuff. First, flavor to gameplay, John. This one a little tough, I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, but like as we've said multiple times, C's get degrees, it's technically passing.
It is. It's just, the models are so cool, and I like some of the rules so much that I want it to be higher. But I just can't. There's a big boat anchor dragging this score down in what otherwise could have been a really, really high score. And that is that while there's a lot of beautiful units, like the Varangian Guard we mentioned, or the Cataphracts, or the Bone Golems, who look wonderful and have rules that play how you would probably imagine them to, as well as some core rules that I think are cool. There are a lot of units in this army that I just do not see on the table.
Yeah.
Some of them I have never seen on the table. And again, this is almost the most common played faction in our play group.
Yeah.
It's up there with 100 Kingdoms for number of players. And even with all of those games amongst multiple people across many, many months, there are some units that are never seen, and it's a cry and shame that a whole lot of flavor is left on the table. Bucephaloi, Caryatids, and Moroi come to mind as examples of stuff that, like, I've seen Caryatids once, I've never seen Bucephaloi, I've never seen Moroi on the table.
Yeah, I think I've played against Moroi once, and my opponent went, I don't want to take those until they get changed. Those don't feel good. I'm just going to take their brothers.
Yeah, it's hard not to have that mark against it for the flavor.
Yeah, I think like many of the factions struggle with internal balance, but I think here it struggles really hard in internal balance, just across the faction. There is a lot of units that all seem to sort of do the same role, and so the one that does it the most point efficiently takes the cake. And really, like, you can't give this army too many things it can do, because it can't take resolve. So then you run into a situation where it can do everything and also not take resolve. So, like, what do you do with all those units?
It's a tough it's a tough corner to be painted into design-wise. I get it. It's just, it does knock the points.
Mm-hmm.
However, then the next one is, how friendly is it to newcomers? Because, let's be honest, when you get into the game and you look at all the miniatures that Parabellum provides for all the armies, one of the most striking groups of minis, in my opinion, is the Old Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
Their designs are incredible. I mean, top-notch model work and artwork. They're very eye-catching. I mean, I'm not like an Undead Legion guy, and even I looked at them and went, man, maybe I could. They're appealing, which could draw new players in to this force. I mean, it drew our editor Seth in as his first force.
And I'll be honest, like, they paint up really quickly and really easily. Like, they paint up fast. They're, much like a lot of undead factions, really prone to just being really easy to tip your toes into the idea of, like, hobbying and painting as well. While still having a bunch of very beautiful sculpts that you can push to the limit and just make truly gorgeous pieces out of. Like, this is a very, very rewarding faction to hobby with. And it isn't particularly hard to learn the game on if you plan on playing this faction primarily.
Yeah, it's tough, because oftentimes, like, for example, when we've rated Wadrun and Nords, we had to rate this really low because those basic mechanics are really complicated. They're overwhelming if you're a new player, so the score was low for obvious reasons. Here, I think the playstyle is really, really obvious, and anyone with any amount of wargame experience, or even without, could figure out how this is supposed to play to get the wins.
Mm-hmm.
You fight for objectives early, you're going to die. As your stuff dies, your other stuff comes on more powerfully, you hit your opponent hard. That's not hard to get your head around. And even the sort of like ticking up dark power pool, not complicated if you have a 20-sided dice. Pretty easy. So in that case, it's not a super low rating. I would give it like a B, but also the thing that makes this hard is that if you are only going to play this faction, B, easy. But if you are considering learning the game on this faction, and then going to play another faction, I think you will end up a new player who has some bad habits because you learned on Old Dominion.
Yeah.
Because you are not going to learn how the resolve half of the game plays.
Yeah, it teaches you a lot of, like, unexpected math, right? Like, 12 wounds feels like way more to you when you're Old Dominion. And if you go to say something like 100 Kingdoms, those 12 wounds are going to feel much worse. Much, much worse.
Those 12 wounds are going to feel more like 8 wounds or 6 wounds.
That's a good analogy. Like, but if you go from another faction to Old Dominion, everything just feels way tougher because you're used to 12 wounds, not 16.
Yeah. So I feel like I have to talk it up. It ended up like a B-. But like, if you're just going to play Old Dominion, you're going to have a good time. If you're into that, have at it. It's not going to really vex you. Just be wary if you go to switch factions, you might have to relearn some habits.
But I do think there is one big negative to them being a fairly straightforward and, I don't want to say simple army to learn, or like just predictable army, and that is the long-term mastery for this faction is lacking. We're going to grade this a D. It's not quite a fail. And I'm going to be honest, the only reason why it's not really there is because the Fallen Divinity list exists.
And it's hard.
It's hard. It takes a lot of mastery. It's very unique. It's very different. It is essentially like an entire another army, almost, in this faction that you can play, just by switching out the Warlord. Granted, it is like basically a demigod, but like, it's still cool, right? That list is very deep with a huge ceiling, and just like, you can get really good with and then win all sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you gain that ability from mastery, not because it's necessarily innately good. The rest of the faction has just bad internal balance that creates very mono lists where everyone just sort of gets to the same direction and then takes that same list every game and has the same game plan every game, regardless of opponent, and just keeps doing that. Very little flex, very little like change. And so what you end up having is a weird situation where you have a mid-tier floor where it's there's a lot of knowledge to get to being able to be proficient with the army, and then once you're there, you're already almost at the ceiling because it has a
Mm-hmm.
low ceiling. So once you understand how the faction works, you basically have nowhere else to go. You've done the thing, and now it's just playing the games on repeat.
Which I think is why you don't see stuff like Bucephaloi or Moroi or what is that? Caryatids. I think those are the ones with like the bows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because there is one playstyle here. It seems even from people who have played this competitively, there is one playstyle, and if the units inside the roster don't fit the playstyle, you just won't take them. Whereas in other factions, you might try to like stretch your legs a little with Nords, for example, and I play my Blooded list, and I play a different sort of warband of Nords than you would see in like your standard Shaman list. Or John in Wadroon, instead of going all the Dino stuff in Double Tontor, is trying more infantry-heavy Wadroon, and still trying to use those core mechanics, but in another list style to get the win. Here, you're not going to see that, and it pigeonholes really experienced players into similar lists almost every time, and similar playstyle almost every time.
And I
Which
think,
is rough for depending on the person.
and this is starting to change. Like Parabellum is releasing new units pretty much like this week that we're recording this for Old Dominion, which could change a lot of this. They're like undead archer centaurs, which are like sick.
So cool. God,
And like
the minis
cultists
are
and
awesome.
stuff, they're just adding more options, which is what the army needs, is like more options, more things. But like foundationally, it does get a little weird because you have to bring legionnaires. So no matter what you do, you're going to be bringing legionnaires. You're going to need those legionnaires to die at some point to get your dark power points. So the core of the army never really changes. Like you have like a tax of this is how many legionnaires I have to take. And despite the fact that they're an extremely good unit and they do exactly what they're supposed to do, but for a very good point cost, having to take them means that you are automatically shifting every list in that direction of just like bodies on objectives as soon as possible to die to generate power for my late game sucker punches. Like, that's the list. Like, that's Old Dominion. There's no early game list for Old Dominion currently because they don't have the models to do so.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I hope this changes in the future. New minis will help, but I hope that at the core of the design, they open up some more sort of like design space for various playstyles. I think that would help this faction immensely with having, longevity for its player base. Because we do know multiple players who played Old Dominion for, 4 to 6 months and then put them down and have not come back to them in a minute. Because they felt like they hit the ceiling. There wasn't a whole lot more they needed to learn. And that's a shame. And it hopefully isn't like that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, regardless, we're probably going to end up playing against Old Dominion more. It's a very popular faction, if not one of the most popular in Conquest.
Yeah, I would like to see player data, because I haven't seen any, of just like how many people play what. But I would bet Old Dominion is top 3. I'd almost bet money Old Dominion is top 3. They're just so cool that there's no way that they're not at least high. And for people out there who are listening to this and maybe a little concerned that some of the ratings are low, not every army is perfect. All of them have drawbacks. Even our own armies, which we deeply enjoy, had some drawbacks. It comes with it. The question isn't, does an army have drawback or not? The question is, do the drawbacks align for what you're looking for? Do they fit your preferences, your play styles, and your restrictions and wants? And if it does, don't let a low score in a category or two deter you in any way. It's just money don't grow on trees for anybody. Hobby dollars are limited, and anything we can do to help people spend their money where they're actually going to get the most fun for their buck, we'd like to.
And if you're coming to Conquest from other games, you might be concerned about like, oh, this balance is just going to be like this for a while. I'm just going to calmly and gently remind you that Parabellum is very receptive to its player base. When there are problems with armies, they're seeing it. They have shown that they talk in the Discord, they see the conversations, they are actively engaged. And so if there's a problem, they probably already know about it, and they're probably working on it. They tackle it in a different way than a lot of us are used to in the wargaming sphere, where we're sort of used to these big, huge drops of rules that sort of completely changed the meta overnight. And that's not Parabellum. Parabellum does things slowly with tests, just to sort of like see if they can get something to where it needs to be, instead of just shaking the jar every like 3 to 6 months.
Which I appreciate.
So just maybe allow for a little bit of a mind shift, and just try to, if you really like the aesthetics of the army, just enjoy the aesthetics of the army, find out what works for you, test out some different stuff with your party, with like the rest of your group, and just have a good time.
And if you're out there and you are an experienced Old Dominion player and you think we're absolutely full of it, please leave it in the comments. I would love to be wrong and be able to report back to our friends that, like, no, there is deep multiplayer style stuff happening here. I mean that honestly. We are far from omniscient and can be wrong, and I would love to hear other stuff. Also, if you're out there and you have questions about Old Dominion that maybe we didn't quite address, or maybe you have concerns we didn't quite address, feel free to ask those in the comments below, or reach out on social media. We are more than happy to help, or circle back to do another follow-up episode in the future if there are big changes. And as you can imagine, we will be working on other factions. The next one coming up is maybe a little cavalry based, is maybe charging into a whole new segment of Wargaming, and is maybe the dawn of a nightmare for everything in my army. And it'll be a fun one.
We can keep asking nicely for a trebuchet.
Maybe trebuchet, baby. We'll see. For now, that's been all of our opinions. Bonafide and Kentucky Fried. We'll see y'all in the next one.